The morning sun cast long shadows across the pristine grounds of Windsor Castle, as Thomas Mitchell adjusted his red uniform for what he feared might be the last time. At 52 years old, he had served the royal family for nearly 3 decades, watching young princes and princesses grow up before his eyes. Today, however, his career hung by a thread because of one terrible mistake that had happened just 2 days earlier. Thomas had always been known for his unwavering dedication and attention to detail. His colleagues respected him and the royal staff trusted him completely. He had never missed a single day of duty in 28 years, not even when his wife Sarah was in the hospital giving birth to their twin daughters. His record was spotless, his loyalty unquestionable, and his commitment absolute. That's what made the recent incident so shocking to everyone who knew him. It all started on a busy Tuesday afternoon, when several important dignitaries were visiting the castle. The schedule was packed with meetings, ceremonies, and formal dinners. Thomas was assigned to guard the entrance to the Queen's private library, a position that required the highest level of security clearance. This particular room contained priceless historical documents, rare books, and personal correspondence that dated back centuries. Only a select few people were allowed entry, and even then, only with proper authorization and escort. The afternoon was proceeding normally when Thomas received an urgent message that his youngest daughter, Emma, had been rushed to the hospital after a serious accident at school. The 11-year-old had fallen from playground equipment and suffered a severe head injury. The doctors were uncertain about her condition, and Sarah was beside herself with worry. The hospital staff had specifically requested that both parents come immediately, as Emma was asking for her father and becoming increasingly distressed. Thomas found himself torn between his duty and his family. In all his years of service, he had never faced such a dilemma. The rules were clear about abandoning one's post, but his daughter needed him. After 20 agonizing minutes of internal struggle, Thomas made the decision that would later threaten his entire career. He asked his colleague James to cover for him temporarily while he rushed to the hospital, explaining the emergency situation. James agreed without hesitation, understanding the gravity of the situation. What Thomas didn't realize was that his brief absence would coincide with an unscheduled security inspection. The head of palace security, Colonel Richard Ashworth, was conducting surprise checks throughout the castle that day. When he arrived at the library entrance, he found James standing guard instead of Thomas. James, caught off guard and nervous, stumbled through his explanation of the situation. The colonel's face grew stern as he realized that proper protocol had not been followed. According to royal security regulations, no guard was permitted to leave their assigned post without going through the proper chain of command and receiving official approval. The fact that Thomas had made this decision on his own, regardless of the circumstances, was considered a serious breach of protocol. Colonel Ashworth was known for his strict adherence to rules and regulations, believing that any compromise in security procedures could potentially endanger the entire royal family. Thomas spent 4 hours at the hospital, holding Emma's hand as doctors ran tests and monitored her condition. Thankfully, the injury turned out to be less severe than initially feared, and Emma was expected to make a full recovery. However, when Thomas returned to the castle that evening, he was immediately summoned to Colonel Ashworth's office. The conversation that followed was brief and decisive. Thomas was suspended pending a formal disciplinary hearing, with the strong likelihood of immediate dismissal. The news spread quickly through the castle staff. Thomas had always been well-liked and respected by his colleagues, and many felt that the punishment was too harsh given the circumstances. However, they also understood that security protocols existed for important reasons, and exceptions could not be made lightly. The royal family's safety depended on every guard following procedures exactly as prescribed, without deviation or personal interpretation. Sarah was devastated when Thomas came home that night and explained the situation. They had built their entire life around his stable position at the castle. Their mortgage, their children's school fees, and their family's future all depended on his income. At 52, Thomas knew that finding another job with similar pay and benefits would be extremely difficult. The prospect of starting over at his age, especially with a black mark on his employment record, seemed almost impossible. The formal hearing was scheduled for the following Friday, giving Thomas just 3 days to prepare his defense. He spent those days writing letters, gathering character references, and trying to build a case for why he should be given a second chance. His supervisor wrote a glowing recommendation, highlighting Thomas's exemplary service record and the unique circumstances of the incident. Several colleagues offered to testify on his behalf, emphasizing his reliability and dedication over the years. Despite these efforts, Thomas knew that Colonel Ashworth was unlikely to show mercy. The man had built his reputation on maintaining the highest security standards, and he had dismissed other guards for lesser infractions in the past. Thomas prepared himself for the worst, spending sleepless nights wondering how he would provide for his family and what career options might be available to him at his age. On Thursday morning, as Thomas walked through the castle grounds one more time, he reflected on all the memories he had made within these walls. He remembered watching Prince William and Prince Harry as young boys, racing through the corridors during family gatherings. He recalled the excitement when Princess Charlotte was born and how the entire staff had celebrated the arrival of the newest royal family member. These walls had been his second home for nearly 3 decades, and the thought of leaving them forever filled him with an overwhelming sadness. Little did Thomas know that his fate was about to change in the most unexpected way possible. As he made his rounds that morning, carefully observing every detail of the castle he might soon have to leave forever, a small figure was watching him from an upstairs window. Princess Charlotte, now 8 years old, had noticed the sadness in the guard's eyes and was about to embark on a mission that would alter the course of Thomas's life completely. Princess Charlotte had always been an observant child, much more so than most adults realized. At 8 years old, she possessed an unusual ability to notice details that others missed and to sense when something was wrong. Her governess often marveled at how the young princess could detect subtle changes in people's moods or behavior, sometimes even before the individuals themselves were fully aware of their feelings. That Thursday morning, as Charlotte sat in the window seat of her favorite reading room, she watched Thomas making his rounds in the courtyard below. She had known Thomas for her entire life, and he had always been one of her favorite guards. Unlike some of the others who maintained strict professional distance, Thomas had a kind face and gentle eyes that always seemed to light up when he saw her. He would often give her a small, respectful nod when their paths crossed, and once, when she was much younger, he had quietly helped her retrieve a dropped toy without making a fuss about it. Today, however, something was different about Thomas. His usual confident stride seemed slower, his shoulders appeared to carry an invisible weight, and his normally alert expression was clouded with worry. Charlotte noticed that he kept glancing up at the castle windows, as if he was trying to memorize every detail of the building. There was a sadness in his demeanor that made the little princess feel concerned and curious. Charlotte had overheard fragments of conversations between the adult staff members over the past few days. She knew that something serious had happened involving one of the guards, though the adults always stopped talking when they noticed her presence. However, Charlotte was skilled at piecing together information from various sources, and she had begun to understand that Thomas was in some kind of trouble. The previous evening, while walking past the servants' quarters with her nanny, Charlotte had heard 2 housekeepers discussing the situation in hushed tones. She learned that Thomas had left his post to help his injured daughter, and that he was facing dismissal as a result. The injustice of the situation struck Charlotte immediately. In her young mind, it seemed completely wrong that someone should be punished for helping their child in an emergency. Charlotte's sense of fairness had always been highly developed. She regularly stood up for her younger brother, Prince Louis, when she felt he was being treated unfairly, and she had a strong instinct for protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. The idea that Thomas, who had always been so kind and dedicated, might lose his job for helping his family troubled her deeply. After watching Thomas for several more minutes, Charlotte made a decision that would have surprised the adults around her. With its maturity and determination, she quietly left her reading room and made her way through the castle corridors, moving with the confident familiarity of someone who had grown up within these walls. She knew exactly where she needed to go and whom she needed to speak with. Charlotte's destination was her father's private study, where Prince William often spent his mornings reviewing correspondence and preparing for official duties. She knew that he would be there at this time of day, and she also knew that he had always been approachable when she had something important to discuss. Their relationship was built on mutual respect and open communication, with her father encouraging her to think independently. and express her opinions clearly. As she walked through the hallways, Charlotte formulated her approach carefully. She understood that she needed to present her case in a way that would be taken seriously by the adults involved. At 8 years old, she was already learning about diplomacy and the importance of choosing the right words and timing when addressing serious matters. Charlotte also knew that her position as a member of the royal family carried certain privileges and responsibilities. She had been taught from an early age that her voice could have real impact, but that this power should be used thoughtfully and only for worthy causes. In her mind, helping Thomas definitely qualified as a worthy cause. When Charlotte reached her father's study, she knocked politely and waited for permission to enter. Prince William looked up from his desk with a warm smile, always pleased to see his daughter, especially when she displayed such proper manners. He could tell immediately that this was not a casual visit, as Charlotte's expression was serious and determined. Charlotte began by asking her father if they could have a private conversation about something important. Prince William, recognizing the gravity in his daughter's tone, set aside his paperwork and gave her his full attention. He invited her to sit in the comfortable chair across from his desk, the same chair where they had discussed many important topics over the years. With careful deliberation, Charlotte explained what she had observed about Thomas and what she had learned about his situation. She spoke clearly and thoughtfully, presenting the facts as she understood them and expressing her concern for the guard's welfare. She explained that Thomas had always been kind to her and that she believed he was a good person who had simply made a difficult choice in an emergency situation. Prince William listened intently to his daughter's presentation, impressed by her maturity and her clear sense of justice. He had always encouraged his children to speak up when they witnessed unfairness, and he was proud to see Charlotte putting this principle into practice. However, he also knew that the situation was more complicated than his young daughter fully understood. Prince William explained to Charlotte that security protocols existed for very important reasons, and that even good people sometimes had to face consequences for their actions, regardless of their intentions. He helped her understand that the safety of their entire family depended on guards following rules exactly, without exception, even in difficult circumstances. Charlotte listened carefully to her father's explanation, but she was not easily discouraged. She had inherited her father's determination and her mother's compassionate heart, and she was not willing to accept that nothing could be done to help Thomas. With the persistence that often characterized strong-willed children, she began to explore alternative solutions and ways to address the situation that might satisfy both security concerns and humanitarian considerations. The conversation between father and daughter continued for nearly an hour, with Charlotte demonstrating remarkable insight and empathy for someone her age. Prince William found himself genuinely impressed by her arguments and her unwavering commitment to helping someone she believed had been treated unfairly. By the end of their discussion, Charlotte had planted a seed of doubt in her father's mind about whether the proposed punishment truly fit the circumstances of Thomas's actions. After her conversation with Prince William, Charlotte felt a mixture of hope and determination. While her father had listened respectfully to her concerns, she could sense that he was still bound by the formal protocols and procedures that governed royal security. Charlotte understood that her father's position required him to support the decisions made by security officials, even when those decisions might seem harsh or unfair in individual circumstances. However, Charlotte was not ready to give up on Thomas. Her strong sense of justice and her natural empathy drove her to consider other approaches to the problem. She spent the rest of Thursday thinking carefully about who else might be able to help and how she could best present Thomas's case to make the strongest possible impact. That evening, during the family dinner, Charlotte remained quieter than usual, clearly deep in thought about the situation. Her mother, Catherine, noticed her daughter's contemplative mood and gently asked if everything was all right. Charlotte briefly explained her concerns about Thomas, though she was careful not to reveal all the details of her conversation with Prince William. Catherine listened with the same patient attention that she always gave to her children's concerns. As a mother, she understood the importance of taking their feelings seriously, even when the issues involved were beyond their control. She also appreciated Charlotte's developing sense of social responsibility and her desire to help others who were facing difficulties. After dinner, Catherine had a private conversation with Prince William about Charlotte's involvement in the Thomas situation. Both parents were proud of their daughter's compassion and her willingness to speak up for someone she believed was being treated unfairly. However, they also recognized the complexity of the security issues involved and the importance of maintaining proper protocols. Catherine suggested that perhaps there might be a way to acknowledge Charlotte's concerns while still respecting the necessary security procedures. She pointed out that the royal family had always valued both security and compassion, and that finding a balance between these principles might be possible in this particular case. Meanwhile, Charlotte was developing her own plan. She had remembered something important about the way decisions were made within the royal household. While security officials like Colonel Ashworth had significant authority over their staff, certain types of personnel decisions could be reviewed and modified by higher-ranking members of the royal family, particularly when exceptional circumstances were involved. Charlotte had also recalled several instances when her grandmother, Queen Elizabeth, had personally intervened in staff matters when she felt that individual circumstances warranted special consideration. The Queen had always been known for her deep concern for the welfare of her employees and her willingness to show mercy when situations called for it. On Friday morning, the day of Thomas's disciplinary hearing, Charlotte made another bold decision. She had learned that her grandmother was scheduled to visit Windsor Castle that afternoon for a private lunch with Prince William and Catherine. Charlotte realized that this might be her only opportunity to present Thomas's case to someone with the authority to potentially override Colonel Ashworth's decision. Charlotte spent the morning carefully preparing what she wanted to say to her grandmother. She practiced her presentation several times, making sure that she could explain the situation clearly and persuasively. She also gathered some additional information about Thomas's service record by carefully listening to conversations among the staff members who knew him well. When Queen Elizabeth arrived at Windsor Castle that afternoon, Charlotte was waiting respectfully in the main entrance hall. She approached her grandmother with the proper formal courtesy that had been drilled into her since early childhood, curtsying politely and greeting her with the appropriate level of respect. The Queen was always delighted to see her great-granddaughter, and was particularly pleased by Charlotte's impeccable manners and obvious excitement about something important. Charlotte asked if she might have a brief private audience with her grandmother before lunch, explaining that she had something significant she wanted to discuss. Queen Elizabeth, who had always enjoyed her conversations with Charlotte, agreed immediately. She was curious about what could be so important to warrant such a formal request from her 8-year-old great-granddaughter. They moved to a quiet sitting room where they could speak privately without interruption. Charlotte began her presentation with the same careful preparation she had used with her father. She explained Thomas's situation, his long record of faithful service, and the emergency circumstances that had led to his breach of protocol. She spoke with remarkable poise and clarity for someone her age, demonstrating both her genuine concern for Thomas and her understanding of the broader issues involved. The Queen listened with growing interest and admiration for Charlotte's thoughtful approach to the problem. She was particularly impressed by Charlotte's ability to see beyond the simple rule-breaking, to understand the human circumstances that had created the situation. The Queen had always valued this kind of wisdom and compassion in her family members. Charlotte then made a specific request. She asked if her grandmother might consider personally reviewing Thomas's case before any final decision was made about his employment. She suggested that perhaps there might be alternative consequences that could address the security concerns while still allowing Thomas to continue serving the royal family in some capacity. Queen Elizabeth was moved by Charlotte's eloquent plea and her obvious sincerity. She had always believed in the importance of balancing justice with mercy, and she could see that this situation might indeed warrant special consideration. She promised Charlotte that she would look into the matter personally and ensure that all aspects of the case were thoroughly reviewed before any irreversible decisions were made. The Queen also praised Charlotte for her courage in speaking up for someone who couldn't speak for themselves. She explained to Charlotte that this kind of advocacy for others was one of the most important responsibilities that came with their position in the royal family. She encouraged Charlotte to continue developing this sense of social responsibility as she grew older. After their conversation, Charlotte felt a renewed sense of hope. She knew that her grandmother's involvement would ensure that Thomas's case received the careful consideration it deserved. While she couldn't be certain of the outcome, she felt confident that she had done everything possible to help someone she believed deserved a second chance. Queen Elizabeth wasted no time in acting on Charlotte's request. After their conversation, she immediately summoned her private secretary and instructed him to gather all relevant information about Thomas Mitchell's case, including his complete service record, the details of the recent incident, and the security protocols that had been violated. The Queen was known for her thoroughness in all matters, and she wanted to understand every aspect of the situation before making any decisions. That afternoon, while Thomas was enduring his disciplinary hearing with Colonel Ashworth, the Queen was conducting her own investigation into his background and character. She reviewed his personnel file, which revealed an exemplary record of service spanning nearly 3 decades. Not only had Thomas never been disciplined before, but he had received multiple commendations for his dedication, reliability, and professionalism. The Queen also spoke privately with several senior staff members who had worked closely with Thomas over the years. Each conversation reinforced the same themes. Thomas was universally respected, completely trustworthy, and had always gone above and beyond his required duties. His colleagues described him as someone who would never deliberately compromise security, and they emphasized that his actions on the day in question were completely out of character for him. One particularly telling conversation was with Mrs. Margaret Stevens, the head housekeeper, who had known Thomas since he first joined the castle staff. She explained to the Queen that Thomas had often worked extra shifts to help cover for colleagues who had family emergencies, and that he had never once asked for special consideration for himself. She described the agony Thomas had experienced in choosing between his duty and his daughter's need, and how he had genuinely believed he was making the best decision possible under impossible circumstances. Meanwhile, Thomas was facing Colonel Ashworth in what felt like the longest hour of his life. The disciplinary hearing was conducted with military precision, with each aspect of the security breach examined in detail. Colonel Ashworth presented his case methodically, emphasizing the absolute nature of security protocols and the dangerous precedent that could be set by allowing exceptions, regardless of the circumstances. Thomas was given the opportunity to present his defense, and he spoke honestly about the impossible choice he had faced. He acknowledged that he had violated protocol, but he explained the emergency nature of his daughter's situation and his belief that he had arranged adequate temporary coverage for his post. He expressed deep remorse for any potential security risk his actions might have created, while also standing by his decision to prioritize his child's welfare in a moment of crisis. Colonel Ashworth listened to Thomas's explanation with professional detachment, but his conclusion remained unchanged. In his view, security protocols existed precisely to prevent guards from making personal judgments about when rules could be bent or broken. He believed that Thomas's dismissal was not only justified, but necessary to maintain the integrity of the entire security system. Just as Colonel Ashworth was preparing to deliver his final verdict, his aide entered the room with an urgent message. The Queen had requested that the hearing be postponed, pending her personal review of the case. Colonel Ashworth was clearly surprised by this development, as royal intervention in security matters was extremely rare. However, he had no choice but to comply with the Queen's directive. Thomas left the hearing in a state of confusion and cautious hope. He had no idea why the Queen had chosen to involve herself in his case, but he knew that her intervention represented his last possible chance for redemption. He spent the weekend in anxious anticipation, trying to maintain hope while preparing himself for the possibility that even the Queen's review might not be enough to save his career. During the weekend, Queen Elizabeth continued her investigation by speaking with Thomas's immediate supervisor and reviewing the specific security arrangements that had been in place on the day of the incident. She learned that the library where Thomas had been stationed was actually empty at the time of his departure, with no scheduled visits or activities planned for the remainder of the afternoon. This information added an important nuance to the case, as it suggested that the actual security risk had been minimal. The Queen also took the unusual step of having a private conversation with Thomas's wife, Sarah. This meeting took place on Sunday afternoon at the family's modest home in Windsor Village. Sarah was understandably nervous about meeting the Queen, but she found her to be surprisingly warm and genuinely interested in understanding the family's perspective on the situation. Sarah explained to the Queen how devastating Thomas's potential dismissal would be for their family, both financially and emotionally. She described her husband's dedication to his work and his deep respect for the royal family. She also provided more details about their daughter Emma's accident and the medical emergency that had prompted Thomas's difficult decision. Most importantly, Sarah was able to convey to the Queen the genuine anguish that Thomas had experienced in choosing between his duty and his family. She explained that he had spent sleepless nights since the incident, tormented by guilt over his actions and terrified about the impact his mistake might have on his family's future. The Queen was moved by Sarah's obvious sincerity and her deep love for her husband. By Sunday evening, Queen Elizabeth had formed a clear picture of the situation and the character of the man at its center. She could see that Thomas was not a security risk or someone who took his responsibilities lightly. Instead, he was a devoted father who had made an extremely difficult decision under extraordinary circumstances, and who had suffered greatly as a result. The Queen also reflected on Charlotte's role in bringing this case to her attention. She was proud of her great-granddaughter's compassion and courage, and she recognized that Charlotte had identified something important that the formal disciplinary process had missed. The situation represented exactly the kind of complex human dilemma where strict adherence to rules might not serve the best interests of justice or the royal family's values. On Monday morning, Queen Elizabeth made her decision. She would not simply overturn Colonel Ashworth's recommendation, as this would undermine his authority and set a problematic precedent. Instead, she would propose a solution that acknowledged the seriousness of Thomas's breach of protocol, while also recognizing his exemplary service record and the exceptional circumstances that had led to his actions. Her plan would require careful diplomacy and the cooperation of several parties, but she believed it offered the best path forward for everyone involved. On Monday morning, Queen Elizabeth requested a private meeting with Colonel Ashworth to discuss Thomas's case. The colonel arrived at the appointed time with his usual military bearing, though he was clearly curious about the Queen's unusual level of interest in what he considered a straightforward disciplinary matter. He had served the royal family for over 20 years and had rarely seen the Queen involve herself so directly in personnel decisions. The Queen began the meeting by acknowledging Colonel Ashworth's dedication to maintaining the highest security standards and expressing her appreciation for his years of faithful service. She made it clear that she was not questioning his professional judgment or his commitment to protecting the royal family. This diplomatic approach helped to establish a respectful tone for the difficult conversation that would follow. Queen Elizabeth then presented her own findings from the weekend investigation, sharing the character references she had gathered and the details she had learned about Thomas's exemplary service record. She explained that while she understood the importance of security protocols, she believed that Thomas's case represented exceptional circumstances that might warrant a different approach than standard dismissal. The Queen proposed a creative solution that would address Colonel Ashworth's security concerns while also recognizing Thomas's years of dedicated service and the emergency nature of his actions. Instead of dismissal, she suggested that Thomas receive a formal reprimand and temporary demotion, followed by a probationary period during which he would undergo additional security training and demonstrate his renewed commitment to protocol compliance. Colonel Ashworth listened respectfully to the Queen's proposal, though his initial reaction was clearly one of concern. He worried that any deviation from standard disciplinary procedures might be seen as weakness and could encourage other guards to believe that rules could be bent under certain circumstances. He emphasized his belief that consistent enforcement of security protocols was essential for maintaining the integrity of the entire system. The Queen understood Colonel Ashworth's concerns and acknowledged their validity. However, she pointed out that the royal family's security was best served not just by rigid rule enforcement, but also by maintaining the loyalty and dedication of exceptional staff members like Thomas. She argued that dismissing a guard with nearly 30 years of exemplary service for a single mistake made under extraordinary circumstances might actually harm security by creating resentment and damaging morale among other staff members. The conversation continued for over an hour, with both parties presenting their perspectives thoughtfully and respectfully. Queen Elizabeth's years of experience in balancing competing interests and finding diplomatic solutions proved invaluable in this delicate negotiation. Gradually, she was able to help Colonel Ashworth see that her proposed approach might actually strengthen security by demonstrating both firm standards and reasonable compassion. Eventually, Colonel Ashworth agreed to the Queen's proposal, though he insisted on adding several conditions to ensure that Thomas understood the seriousness of his actions. These conditions included mandatory retraining in security protocols, a 6-month probationary period with enhanced supervision, and a formal written acknowledgement of his breach of duty. Thomas would also be required to develop and present new emergency procedures for situations where guards might face family crises while on duty. Meanwhile, Thomas was enduring another sleepless night, unaware of the high-level negotiations taking place on his behalf. He had spent the weekend trying to prepare his family for the possibility that he might lose his job, while also desperately hoping that some miracle might save his career. Sarah had tried to remain optimistic, but the financial reality of their situation made it difficult to maintain hope for a positive outcome. On Monday afternoon, Thomas received a message instructing him to report to Colonel Ashworth's office the following morning for the conclusion of his disciplinary proceedings. The formal tone of the message gave no indication of what decision had been reached, leaving Thomas to spend another anxious night wondering about his fate. Tuesday morning arrived gray and drizzly, matching Thomas's somber mood as he made his way to Colonel Ashworth's office. He had dressed in his best uniform, wanting to maintain his dignity regardless of the outcome. As he walked through the castle corridors, he tried to memorize every detail, unsure whether he would ever see them again as an employee rather than a visitor. When Thomas entered Colonel Ashworth's office, he was surprised to find not only the colonel, but also the Queen's private secretary and a representative from the palace personnel department. The formal nature of the gathering made it clear that this was not going to be a simple conversation, but Thomas couldn't tell whether the additional presence indicated good news or bad news for his situation. Colonel Ashworth began by reviewing the charges against Thomas and acknowledging his admission of guilt regarding the protocol violation. He spoke about the importance of security procedures and the serious nature of abandoning one's post, regardless of the circumstances. For several minutes, Thomas felt certain that he was about to be dismissed and began mentally preparing himself for the devastating news. However, Colonel Ashworth then surprised Thomas by announcing that his case had been reviewed at the highest levels and that an alternative disciplinary approach had been approved. Instead of dismissal, Thomas would receive a formal reprimand, temporary demotion to a lower security classification, and 6 months of probationary status with additional training requirements. Thomas was stunned by this unexpected development. He had been so prepared for dismissal that the alternative punishment felt like a miracle. While the consequences were still serious and would affect his pride and his paycheck, they represented a second chance that he had never dared to hope for. He accepted the terms gratefully and with deep humility, understanding that he had been given an extraordinary opportunity to redeem himself. As the meeting concluded, the Queen's private secretary mentioned that Her Majesty had taken a personal interest in Thomas's case and had been impressed by the character references provided by his colleagues. While the specific details of the Queen's involvement were not disclosed, Thomas understood that someone very important had advocated on his behalf. Though he had no idea who that might have been or why they had chosen to help him, Thomas left the meeting feeling overwhelmed with gratitude and relief. He couldn't wait to share the news with Sarah and to begin the process of rebuilding his career and his reputation. He was determined to prove that the faith shown in him had not been misplaced and that he deserved the second chance he had been given. When Thomas arrived home that Tuesday evening, Sarah could immediately tell from his expression that something significant had happened. She had been anxiously waiting for news all day, trying to keep herself busy with household tasks while her mind raced with worry about their family's future. The moment Thomas walked through the door, she could see relief and gratitude written across his face. Thomas gathered his family in the living room and shared the incredible news about his reprieve. Sarah burst into tears of relief and joy, while their twin daughters, now 24 and working in nearby towns, celebrated their father's second chance. Even 11-year-old Emma, still recovering from her accident but much improved, seemed to understand the importance of the moment and hugged her father tightly. The family spent the evening discussing the new terms of Thomas's employment and what the probationary period would mean for their daily lives. While Thomas's temporary demotion would result in a reduction in pay, the financial impact was manageable compared to the devastation of complete job loss. More importantly, Thomas would be able to continue working in the career he loved, serving the royal family he had devoted his life to protecting. That night, Thomas lay awake thinking about the mysterious intervention that had saved his career. He knew that someone with significant influence had spoken on his behalf, but he couldn't imagine who it might have been or why they had chosen to help him. He was deeply grateful to his unknown benefactor and determined to prove worthy of their faith in him. The next morning, Thomas reported for his first day under the new disciplinary arrangement. He had been reassigned to exterior patrol duties, a less prestigious position than his previous post, but still an important role in the castle's overall security structure. His colleagues greeted him warmly, many expressing relief that he had been given a second chance and offering their support during his probationary period. As Thomas began his new duties, he noticed Princess Charlotte walking in the castle gardens with her governess. The young princess looked in his direction and gave him a small, knowing smile that seemed oddly significant. For a moment, Thomas wondered if there might be some connection between Charlotte's friendly gesture and his recent good fortune, but he quickly dismissed the thought as unlikely. After all, what could an 8-year-old princess, however intelligent and compassionate, have done to influence his disciplinary proceedings? Over the following weeks, Thomas threw himself into his work with renewed dedication and enthusiasm. He approached every task, no matter how routine, with meticulous attention to detail and professional pride. His supervisor noted his exceptional attitude and performance, commenting that Thomas seemed more committed than ever to excellence in his duties. During his mandatory retraining sessions, Thomas not only mastered the required material, but also volunteered to help develop the new emergency procedures that had been requested as part of his disciplinary terms. He worked with security officials to create protocols that would allow guards to handle family emergencies without compromising their posts, ensuring that future guards wouldn't face the same impossible choice he had encountered. Thomas's efforts to redeem himself did not go unnoticed by his superiors. Colonel Ashworth, who had initially been skeptical about the alternative disciplinary approach, was impressed by Thomas's response to his second chance. The colonel began to see that the Queen's instincts about Thomas's character had been correct, and he gradually developed a new respect for the guard's integrity and professionalism. Meanwhile, Princess Charlotte continued to observe Thomas discreetly, taking quiet satisfaction in seeing his renewed confidence and obvious gratitude. She had learned an important lesson about the power of advocacy and the difference that speaking up for others could make. The experience had reinforced her natural inclination toward justice and compassion, values that would serve her well throughout her life. Charlotte never revealed her role in Thomas's salvation to anyone except her parents, who were incredibly proud of their daughter's courage and initiative. Prince William and Catherine used the incident as a teaching moment, helping Charlotte understand both the positive impact of her actions and the importance of using her influence responsibly and thoughtfully. As the months passed, Thomas's probationary period proceeded smoothly. His performance evaluations were consistently excellent, and his colleagues continued to express their respect and support for him. The incident that had nearly ended his career gradually became a distant memory, replaced by renewed confidence in his abilities and deep appreciation for the second chance he had received. Thomas also used his experience to mentor younger guards, sharing his hard-earned wisdom about the importance of following protocols while also understanding the human side of their profession. He became known for his willingness to help colleagues navigate difficult personal situations without compromising their professional responsibilities. The new emergency procedures that Thomas had helped develop were implemented castle-wide and proved to be valuable additions to the security framework. These protocols provided clear guidelines for guards facing family crises, ensuring that security would not be compromised, while also acknowledging the human needs of the staff. Thomas's contribution to these procedures was formally recognized by his superiors, who praised his insights and practical experience. 6 months after the incident, Thomas's probationary period came to an end with glowing reviews from all of his supervisors. Colonel Ashworth personally commended Thomas for his exemplary behavior during the probationary period and recommended that he be restored to his previous security classification. The formal reprimand would remain in his file, but Thomas had clearly demonstrated that he deserved to be trusted with important responsibilities once again. As Thomas prepared to return to his original duties, he reflected on the journey he had taken over the past months. The experience had been painful and frightening, but it had also taught him valuable lessons about resilience, gratitude, and the importance of the people who choose to support us during our darkest moments. He remained grateful to his mysterious benefactor, whoever they might have been, and he was determined to live up to the faith that had been placed in him. 1 year after the incident that nearly ended his career, Thomas Mitchell stood once again at his original post outside the Queen's private library. His red uniform was immaculate, his bearing confident, and his reputation fully restored. The past 12 months had been a journey of redemption that had strengthened both his character and his commitment to serving the royal family with distinction. The anniversary of his daughter's accident came and went quietly, but Thomas never forgot the lessons he had learned from that difficult day. Emma had made a complete recovery and was thriving at school, often asking her father about his work and expressing her own admiration for the royal family. The crisis that had once threatened to destroy his career had ultimately brought his family closer together and reminded them all of what truly mattered in life. Thomas's relationship with his colleagues had not only recovered but had actually grown stronger. His willingness to share his experience and mentor younger guards had earned him widespread respect throughout the security department. Many of his fellow guards had come to see him as a source of wisdom and support, someone who understood both the demands of their profession and the challenges of balancing work with family responsibilities. Colonel Ashworth had also developed a new appreciation for Thomas's character and contributions. The emergency procedures that Thomas had helped develop had proven their worth on several occasions, allowing other guards to handle family crises without compromising security. The colonel had come to see that the Queen's decision to show mercy in Thomas's case had ultimately strengthened rather than weakened the security organization. On a crisp autumn morning, as Thomas was performing his regular duties, he was approached by Princess Charlotte, now 9 years old and even more poised and articulate than she had been the previous year. She was accompanied by her governess, but she asked for a private moment to speak with Thomas personally. Charlotte looked up at Thomas with the same intelligent, compassionate eyes that had first noticed his distress over a year earlier. With characteristic directness, she asked him how he was feeling and whether he was happy to be back in his original position. Thomas was touched by her genuine concern and assured her that he was indeed very grateful for his second chance. Then, in a moment that would stay with Thomas for the rest of his life, Charlotte quietly revealed that she had been the one who had spoken to her grandmother about his situation. She explained that she had noticed his sadness and had learned about his predicament through careful observation and listening. She told him that she had felt it was unfair for him to lose his job for helping his injured daughter, and that she had believed he deserved another chance. Thomas was stunned by this revelation. He had spent months wondering about the identity of his mysterious benefactor, never imagining that his salvation had come from someone so young. He looked down at this remarkable child who had possessed the courage and compassion to advocate for someone she barely knew, and he felt overwhelmed with gratitude and admiration. Charlotte explained that she had learned important lessons from the experience as well. She had discovered that speaking up for others could make a real difference, but she had also learned about the complexity of adult decisions and the importance of understanding all sides of a situation before taking action. The incident had reinforced her natural sense of justice while also teaching her about diplomacy and the responsible use of influence. Thomas thanked Charlotte with heartfelt sincerity, expressing his deep gratitude for her intervention and her belief in his character. He promised her that he would never forget her kindness, and that he would spend the rest of his career trying to prove worthy of the faith she had shown in him. Charlotte smiled and told him that she believed he had already proven himself through his excellent work and his dedication to helping others. As Charlotte and her governess continued their walk, Thomas stood at his post with a new understanding of the events that had shaped the past year of his life. He was amazed by the courage and wisdom that this young princess had displayed, and he felt honored to serve a family that had raised such an exceptional child. Word of Charlotte's role in Thomas's reprieve eventually spread quietly through the castle staff, though the details were shared only among those who could be trusted to keep the information confidential. The story became a source of inspiration for many of the employees who were moved by the princess's compassion and her willingness to use her position to help someone in need. Thomas went on to serve the royal family for many more years, eventually becoming one of the most senior and respected members of the security team. He never experienced another crisis like the one that had nearly ended his career, but he carried the memory of Charlotte's intervention with him always. The experience had taught him that sometimes help comes from the most unexpected sources, and that courage and compassion can be found in people of any age. Princess Charlotte continued to grow into a remarkable young woman, guided by the same sense of justice and empathy that had driven her to help Thomas. The incident became one of the formative experiences of her childhood, teaching her about the power of advocacy and the importance of standing up for those who cannot speak for themselves. Years later, when Charlotte was older and more involved in official royal duties, she would often reflect on the Thomas Mitchell incident as a defining moment in her understanding of leadership and service. She had learned that true nobility came not from titles or positions, but from the willingness to use one's influence to help others and to fight for what is right. Thomas's family never forgot what Princess Charlotte had done for them. The story became part of their family lore, passed down through generations as an example of how unexpected kindness could change the course of a life. Emma, whose accident had inadvertently triggered the crisis, grew up with a deep respect for the royal family and a clear understanding of the difference that compassion and courage could make in the world. The touching story of Princess Charlotte's intervention on behalf of Thomas Mitchell became a testament to the power of empathy, the importance of speaking up for others, and the remarkable impact that one person's courage can have on another's life. It demonstrated that true leadership often begins with simply caring enough to act when witnessing injustice, regardless of one's age or position in life.